Hello, this is Brian P., and welcome to Scaling the Well. So today I thought we'd talk about confidence. I got this idea from my little cousin Adrian, so shout out to her. And we're going to talk about what it is, what it isn't, and how do you gain confidence? I think sometimes people look at confidence and they think it's just kind of a simple concept, but I always like to take things that seem simple and break them down a little bit more into their finer components. So first of all, everybody, believes that confidence is a good thing. And I don't think there's any argument there. But what exactly is it? If you had to define it, that's obviously the dictionary definition. And I believe, my definition, and it's probably similar to what's ever in Webster's or dictionary, .com. But it's basically to me the belief that you can accomplish, and dot, 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 accomplish anything. And that would be goals, right? Whether that's getting a job, whether that's, getting a date, whether that's completing a project. Confidence is a necessary component to success, and it's a necessary component to life in general, just kind of going through your daily. So what isn't confidence though? Well, confidence is not a lack of fear. So you can be afraid, you can be nervous, but you can still have confidence. And I know that those two things seem to contradict each other, but if you're going for a job interview, you're naturally going to be nervous, and if you really want this job or if you really need that job, you might even have a little bit of actual fear, and which is basically the extreme version of nervousness, and that's okay, because confidence is something that is solid. It's something that you can rely on to kind of get you over those nerves, because it's giving you the reason to even apply. So, and I think a better way to describe this is that confidence is not arrogance. So what is arrogance? So arrogance versus confidence. Now, arrogance often appears like confidence. If you see somebody who's very arrogant, you might mistake them for being confident. So what's the difference? Well, arrogance is having the belief that you can accomplish, just like, what actual confidence is. It's having that belief without any evidence to back it up. So that's the difference. So if you're going for that job interview and it's a job where in your previous job you did a lot of the same duties, you read the job specs, the description and whatever, and you're like, oh, I've done this before, and you've done it for an extended period of time, so let's say that it's a graphic arts job, and you've done that before in your previous job, and you know how to use different, software programs on the computer that relate to graphic arts, and maybe you've even studied it in school, or maybe it's just a hobby of yours and that you've been doing and you are self-taught. However you got those skills, you have them. And so when you go into that job, you're never going to look at the interviewer with a blank stare. You're going to be able to answer those questions. And even if it's a question that's a surprise, you could steer it into your strengths. And we'll talk about strengths a little bit later. But so that's true confidence. Arrogance is you don't have any of that. You just believe that you can get it because you're great. You're just naturally great. People, either you're going to get it because people are just going to find you charming, or you're just attractive. And I'm not saying that those things don't count. Those things do count. They go on a scoreboard, but you really don't have anything that, I don't want to say it's quantifiable. I mean, skills aren't necessarily quantifiable, but you do know that you've done it before. So, confidence, is something that's built. And I think the problem that a lot of people have is that they don't realize, that they should. There's a lot of people who don't have confidence that should, and there's a lot of people who have arrogance, that shouldn't. And I think, this is really what this podcast is about, is not to say, okay, how do you, get the skills to have confidence? It's like realizing, what do you have, and why should you be confident in going to these things, and what paths you can take in order to achieve those goals, So again, arrogance is having the belief you can accomplish something, without any evidence of that. There's no experience. There's no schooling. There's no practice. So why would you think you can be a doctor if you've never went to school? It's kind of like those old Holiday Inn Express commercials, the one with the doctor, and he's like, oh, wait a minute, you're not a doctor. Like, no, but I stayed at a Holiday Inn Express last night. That's arrogance. Okay, if you ever confuse the two, you can say that arrogance is basically you believe you can do something, but there's no reason. You're not even to have the ability to articulate why you can do it. You just think it. And yeah, it's sometimes, arrogance you can pull a lot of things off with arrogance because, if you're out and you look confident and, a lot of people will give you a pass on a lot of things, but when it comes to higher level things such as careers or relationships, it's not going to fly, at least not fly with rational functioning people. So how do you gain confidence? Well, I think that, the number one thing is practice. If you have a goal in mind already and it's a very specific goal, you just need to practice doing, the things that it takes to accomplish that goal. So let's just take something that I'm familiar with. So martial arts, there's a lot of times, and this is a perfect example because there's anybody who's done jiu-jitsu or who has studied pretty much any martial art, there's always some guy, and you can go on YouTube and you can see, martial artist beats up, guy off the street, martial artist versus street fighter, and you can see the results. There's people who have arrogance who actually try to match that and test that arrogance. They don't think they're arrogant, but it's apparent to everyone outside of them. They try to test their abilities against people who actually have confidence, meaning people who actually have reasons to believe they can accomplish, what they set out to do. And you'll see guys, and this, I've seen this in real life, by the way, back in the early 2000s, where there would be people who would come into jiu-jitsu schools, off the street, or they're just tough guys, and they would challenge black belts or, people who aren't even black belts. You don't even have to be a black belt to subdue somebody or submit somebody who is untrained. But there would be people who would just come in and challenge them just for the sake of their ego because they were arrogant, and they would just get squashed. And you can see just tons and tons of videos of this. You could even see like small women choking out guys who are over 200 pounds and putting them to sleep. It's a trip, what arrogance can do. Just because somebody's arrogant doesn't mean arrogance isn't powerful. Arrogance is a force. So I don't want to give anybody the impression that, again, arrogance can get you a lot of passes, but don't walk into a boxing gym or a martial arts school and think that you're gonna manhandle somebody if you don't have any training yourself. And as a matter of fact, once you gain confidence, I think another difference between that and arrogance is that you don't feel the need to prove yourself. You just know that your goal is within sight, and basically you have everything in place to accomplish it. And that's actually a good, comforting feeling. Arrogance is almost an irritating feeling because you want people to believe what you believe. And confidence is internal. Arrogance is very external. You really care about, how other people view you. So yeah, that's the number one thing is practice. So once you practice martial arts, you're going to get better. And I know people who have practiced for a long time at certain arts, and they, and it doesn't just apply to martial arts. This applies to anything. I'm just using something that's familiar to me. But, whether it's, coding, computer coding, or it could be painting, or it could be singing, or it could be accounting, it could be anything. And because you're in the moment and you're the one doing it and you're the one putting in the hours, it's hard to judge your own progress until you look back, a couple years ago to where you were. And especially if you're, training or learning with other people, they're progressing too. So when you kind of think that you're still not that good, until you meet somebody who doesn't know anything about your particular field. And then you realize, oh, wow, I've come a long way. And that's when you kind of are able to recognize that confidence. But my suggestion is try to do that early, because there's so many people who are so, they kind of push their confidence or their ability to have that confidence down deep inside them, even though they're really rock stars, if they would just let it loose and if they would really just recognize what they have accomplished and the training that they have done. So practice, number one. Two, which is going to lead into three, is realize what you're already good at. Realize your strengths. So this is more like if you have a general goal. If you have, so let's say you wanted to start a podcast, right? And you're like, well, I don't have anything to talk about. I'm not good at anything. Well, everybody's good at something. If you've lived, into adulthood, you have life experience. One of the things I always say is that everybody has a novel inside them. You just have to find it now. And most people have more than one. So you don't have to be a genius. You don't have to be somebody who, has traveled the world. That how many of the best movies are about, lives and about the lives of people who just live in a neighborhood. There's Academy Award-winning movies about just like a neighborhood or a city, and it's not even about worldly people. It's just about their interactions with the people around them, their interactions with their family and friends. So, yes, realize that your life experience has already made you a master of you. You are already good at many, many things probably, but at least one thing, and you'll have things to talk about. When I every time you hear me refer to my CWS experience, well, that wasn't because I didn't become a CWS social worker because I thought I was going to do a podcast someday. That was just part of my life. Maybe in another life, I'm a mechanic. I could do a podcast about that. And I would use that as a reference to different things, maybe I was a trapeze artist, in another life, in another reality. Well, then, you could do a podcast about that, and that would be your point of reference for a lot of things. So it doesn't matter, if you're a single mom, well, that's an experience, if you're a veteran, that's an experience. If you're a flight attendant or if you're a whatever, wherever your life takes you, you have every memory is a point of reference that you could bring up and talk about, and people are going to find interesting. It's just all how you relay it. So never think that you're not good at anything, because you're probably good at a great many things. And when I say good, I mean knowledgeable, right? You're knowledgeable about your life, and you're going to realize, oh wow, I have done this for a long time. Why not talk about it? If there was somebody who was a waitress for 5 years, and they figure, oh, I didn't graduate high school. I just, started taking care of my mom because she was sick and I had to waitress, and then I had a kid. Well, I guarantee you, if somebody did a podcast about being a waitress and all the experiences you had in the 5 years, there's probably going to be some funny stuff in there. There's probably going to be some troubling stuff in there. There's probably going to be some very happy moments in there. And that's your story. And I bet you could get, hundreds of episodes out of just that experience alone. And if you're a parent, how many comedians, their go-to thing is, so I'm a dad now, so I'm a mom now, yeah, that's an experience. And every one of those experiences is unique. So if you're a waitress and at Denny's, the waitress next door at Coco's, I don't know why I picked those two places, but are going to be totally different. Even the waitress who's takes the other shifts at Denny's, you guys are individual people, so you're going to have different experiences. And and I guess what I'm trying to bring this in is that's where confidence comes from. It's knowing that you have these experiences, and if you can spit those out, at any given situation, it's actually powerful. So realize that these different things that you get. And one of the things I used to do, and I still do now that I'm in HR, is having people break down their resumes. There's so many people who want to apply for a job, and they come to me, as an officer, and they say, hey, I want to apply for a job, but I don't know if I qualify. I know I have a little bit of this. And I'm like, well, and then that's, well, let's break that down, And I tell you, if you worked at Target and you're a cashier at Target, I could break that down into probably 15 different skills. You probably just don't realize it, yourself. I could break that down, and I've gotten people jobs where they didn't think they qualified. And I was like, no, you do qualify if you think about what you have to do, and if you actually read the job specs, you qualify. And I enjoy doing that because it's not just that they get the job; they actually realize, wow, I do have all these things, to put down on my resume, it's really cool. And when you actually, there's people who've gone to college. There was this is a little bit of a tangent, but just a few months ago, and she's about to quit, my organization, and I'm like, well, why? And she's like, I don't know. I don't think I can progress any farther and everything, And she turned out she had an accounting degree, and I'm like, well, do you know that we have this tract over here that you could go into, and this other tract, and these two cross over here, and we went through a whole thing. I spent like a half an hour with her, and guess what? She got a job. There was a promotion, and she's older than I am, and she never thought to even apply these things that she has in her past and put them on her resume and even look. She was going to leave the organization and go somewhere else, and I'm like, no, you have a pension here. You have time served. Like, why would you quit? And it makes me very happy because she's a mom, and she's married and she has a family, and it's like that affects an entire group of people, not just her. So that made me feel real good, and I love doing things like that. So that's why I'm always taking these simple concepts on this podcast and trying to break them down, because it's one thing to just say, oh, you need confidence, or develop confidence. Well, let's explore that. So yes, realize what you're good at, and realize your strengths. And I've talked about this before, like the Gallup strengths. You should go take that Gallup test. I think it's $10, but it's worth it. And you can really get into and analyze like what you're good at and why you kind of do the things you do. And it's very interesting. And so this gets me into what I call the multipath theory. So what is that? Well, and I'm going to use the Gallup strengths as an example, but you don't have to use this. It could be anything that you consider a strength. This just is a little bit easier for me to articulate. So I believe that, and I call it the multipath theory. I come up with these terms. I don't, it's because I don't have any other words for them. I'm sure there's some PhDs that have already given words to these concepts. But when I write down what I'm going to say on the podcast, I need something to kind of link it to. So the multipath theory, to me, is basically any strength can accomplish any goal. So what do I mean by that? So let's say, when I took the Gallup, my top two strengths are strategic and analytic, analyze, I believe. So I'm analytical and I'm strategic, supposedly. I do plan a lot of things out, and I'm pretty good at tactical, at least when it comes to video games. Well, there's a lot of other strengths, I think there's like 32 or something altogether. And then you take this test and it gives you your top 5. And these are kind of the things that kind of come out in your life the most. So, so my wife, for example, has harmony. And a lot of people at my work have taken this because my organization pushes on this. And if you work for any type of large organization, especially like in corporate America, you'll see all these types of personality tests. I can't even mention. I'm drawing a blank, but there's so many of them. And they're all kind of the same thing. Like, what are you good at? What are your strengths? What color are you? Are you a red? Are you a blue? Are you a green? These type of things. And but they're all pretty much the same thing. And if you take a number of them, you'll see the consistency in your readout. But so my wife took the Gallup strengths test. It's called a Strength Finder, and she has harmony as our number one thing, which is basically you want everyone to get along. You're the peacemaker. sometimes it's very easy for you to be an enabler, in my opinion. So sometimes they call these strengths, and of course, me being analytical, I always point out the downfalls of each one, but or the pitfalls. But yeah, she has harmony. And I know people at work who got things like harmony. There's things like woo. It means like a lot of people like you. And I got like the corporate ones. I got strategic, analytic, analyze. What else would I have? I had relator, maximization, I think it's called. Yeah. And individualization. So most of those are like the things you stereotypically see in a CEO. And so I talk to other people, who have woo and who have all these things. And they think those are like weaker strengths. And again, I'm just using the Gallup strengths as a point of reference. It could be anything. And it could be just things that you're good at. It could be skills. And I believe that any one of these things can get you to any goal. And it does. So you might think that somebody who's strategic and, analytical, well, that's CEO material, so obviously I'm going to, promote faster than that person. Well, if you have woo and people like you, well, that's, I know a lot of people who are very smart that are kind of stuck, right? Because, then we get into the conversations of IQ versus EQ, but they don't have the emotional intelligence. They have they have the intellect, they have that standard stuff, and they're very good with Excel, and formulas and figuring things out from a quantifiable basis. But it's the things that aren't quantified that they have trouble with, like human relations. And how many of us have been frustrated when you see somebody who is just kind of that you can do the job better, but people just keep pushing them into these special projects and these higher positions. Well, I don't get mad at that anymore, because what they have is they're capitalizing on their strength. If you have woo, you say, oh, well, that just means I want people to be happy. Maybe I should be a counselor. Well, first of all, if you're a counselor, and I've heard this before, people say this. First of all, if you're a counselor, and I was a social worker, I wasn't a counselor, but if you're a social worker, if you're anything in the behavioral health field, you got to be kind of tough. You got to be ready to confront people. I talked a little bit about this on my last podcast on confrontation. You got to be able to tell people the hard truth, and that might be hard for people with woo, but that doesn't mean that you're not powerful because you have that particular strength. If you are a peacemaker, a lot of people are going to go to you because they can't communicate. And I talked about a little bit about this in the last podcast as well. When I gave the example of, if you have two powerful world leaders, the most powerful person in the room is the translator if they don't speak each other's language, because the translator is the one that's going to be in charge of the communication. And if you're woo, basically, even if everybody in the room speaks English, let's say, and you have people who won't budge and people who are just, if I'm a strategic person and the person sitting across from me is a strategic person and we disagree on the 5-year plan, our strategic plan, well, the person with woo is going to be able to resolve it. And if you resolve enough situations, you're going to get promoted. You just have to be aware of what you're doing and that you have that unique ability to do it. And so that's what I mean by the multipath theory. It doesn't matter what kind of skills you have, what kind of personality you have. You can, if I'm not saying everybody's goal is to be a CEO or anything. I'm just saying if that was your goal, you can reach it with any skill set that you've been given. Any strengths, internal strengths that you have, you can reach that particular goal. And you could be number one in anything. And it doesn't matter, because there's people with all types of skills that are at the top, and there's people with all types of skills who you would consider at the bottom. And so once you realize that your set of skills, once you realize what your skills are, then the next step is to realize that it doesn't matter what set of skills you have, you can still accomplish that goal. Your skill set can accomplish whatever goals you have in front of you. And then that leads into confidence, because so many times there are people who They're like, well, I'm unlucky. I wasn't born with that, and well, okay, maybe you're not the stereotype of whatever that is, if a lot of people who've gone into computer engineering, you think that, well, these guys must be geniuses. These guys must be great at math. What I found out is that most people who are in software engineering, let's just say software engineering, it's not that they're incredibly smart. It's just that they have the incredible ability to focus. And even though there's people who did better at them in school, better at them in math, they can't sit for 4 or 5 hours and do a single task. And yet some people have that. And some people, are looked at as, like kind of nerdy for doing that, and that's where you get that stereotype. Or some people might be looked at as, antisocial, and like, hey, you need to get out and play, like when you're a kid, or you need to do this, you need to do that. Well, maybe that's a strength. Maybe that's, your parents might consider that a weakness. Your teachers might consider that a weakness when you grow up. But then once you become an adult and you find a career that caters to that, and all of a sudden that becomes a strength. And I think I said this in one of my first podcasts. There's no such thing as weakness. This is the first time you've ever heard me mention weakness, really, right? There's no such thing as weakness. There's only untimely strengths. So even the things that you think are holding you back will probably be a positive in another scenario. And so why am I talking about strengths and there's no such thing as weakness and the multipath theory, like any strength can accomplish any goal? Because these are the keys to confidence. Because if you believe everything I just said, then you can, after you turn this podcast off, you could say, well, I have this, this, and this. You can write them down, or you might just, have them in your head, whatever strength you have, right? It doesn't matter. And whatever you want to be, and whatever goals you want to accomplish, they could be short-term goals, they could be long-term goals. And you have the tool set for that. It might not be the same tool set as somebody else who's accomplished that same goal. And I'm saying it doesn't matter. Okay, that's what multipath theory is. It doesn't matter what toolbox you have and what's inside that toolbox. And if that toolbox is different than somebody else who's come before you, you can pave your own path. There's multiple paths to the same goal. So I call it the multipath theory. And that goes for jobs, that goes for projects, that goes for dating. Believe it or not, if you're after that guy or girl, or a specific type of guy or girl, or whatever, yeah, she says she likes somebody who's funny. Okay, well, maybe you're not, make people slap their knees or whatever. You're not, you're not Kevin Hart. Okay, you're not that funny. You're not known for your jokes. Doesn't mean you're not interesting. And I think what most people want, whether you're a man or a woman, you want someone who's interesting. And if you go back to the example I gave you about the waitress and her experiences through 5 years of being a waitress, if you can articulate that, if you can reach inside yourself and pull out that novel that I know you have in you, you've become interesting. Just like that. Just like when Thanos snaps. You're interesting. So that's where confidence comes from. It comes from basically taking an inventory of yourself. And once you have that inventory, understanding that whatever you find, remember when they used to do Storage Wars, that old show? Like if you open that storage set that's inside of you, it doesn't matter if you find gold doubloons or priceless comic books or a couple of coat hangers. You can take those coat hangers and you can rule the world with them. And if you believe that, you're confident. I'm Brian P. This has been Scaling the Well.